And thank you to everyone at Gideon's Promise. Shout out to the founders, Jonathan and Illy, and we're just so grateful for the work that you do across our country and nation, fighting for the rights of those that really just don't have the resources, right, to be able to fight for themselves. And so Silence for Shame is honored to be in this safe place and space today, again, for a community conversation, a discussion on racial trauma and criminal justice. And I would like to welcome our incredible set of panelists today. The team really put together some superstars, so you all are in for a treat as we talk about really what's going on in our nation. And again, I just am so humbled to be able to do this work. So here we go. Our panelists include Sean Hoover. He is a capital trial attorney for the Georgia Public Defender Council and a proud Gideon's Promise alumnus. We also have Dr. Donald Grant Jr., and I've actually worked with Dr. Grant before, so it's an honor to share this stage again with him. He is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and Impact Practitioner. He is also the Executive Director of Mindful Training Solutions, and he is the author of Black Men, Intergenerational Colonialism and Behavioral Health. Next up, we have Emmanuel Terrell. He served 23 years in prison for armed robbery at the age of 18, but persevered through the time that he was incarcerated and has a lot to share about his experience. I look forward to illuminating a profound conversation, but it should be noted that these issues are heavy and may be potentially triggering to some viewers and listeners. So make sure that you give yourself the grace and space. If you need to step away, take a minute, focus on some breath work. There's a really great technique called the 4-4-8. So you can breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4, and then exhale for 8 seconds to kind of reset and recenter yourself. This panel will feature also discussions of suicide, racism, and mental illness. So again, the topics may be heavy, but they are timely. We're coming on the heels of the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, and we certainly honor him and his family. And again, just grateful to be able to do this important work because so many people are still suffering, right, from this racial pandemic that we just came out of as a nation. So I would like to go ahead and start our questions with Dr. Grant, or should I call you Dr. Donald? What do you prefer?
Dr. Grant, Donald, either one is fine with me, Shanti.
Okay, so Dr. Grant, again, welcome. It's wonderful to see you. Scientists who study epigenetics have found that racial trauma alters DNA structures of generations. It is important to understand how deeply ingrained racial trauma is, but it's also important for people to believe that growth and healing is possible, right? That's why we do this work, because it's all about healing and recovery. How do we discuss racial trauma as a biological reality without falling into harmful frameworks of inevitable or unresolvable suffering?
What a great question, and what a great way to kick this off. Thank you, Shanti, hip hop royalty, and definitely an advocate here in this mental health space. And thank you, Silence the Shame, for all the work that you all do there. And Gideon's Promise, thank you for hosting this today. What an important meeting. It's important to talk about the biological piece, but there's danger in it because biological racism has been used to our disadvantage. So what we don't want to do is demonstrate a deficits model, but what we do want to do is make sure that we do acknowledge the fact that trauma lives in our bodies. We first learned about intergenerational trauma through Holocaust, the children of Holocaust survivors in the 60s. And epigenetics, for those of you who don't know, it's a scientific study that demonstrates how our DNA changes as a result. They call it remodeling in some ways. So think about if you had a room and you had an air conditioning vent and you made a mistake and painted over it. It would impact how the air circulates through the room. And as a result, it would change the dynamic of the house. Your DNA, when it goes through epigenetics, different folds happens on it, and it creates a differential way in which it produces and directs proteins, which may result in a more difficult time becoming re-regulated. And so, for instance, in indigenous communities, we see these outcomes with substance abuse, domestic violence, and it's highly connected to their experience with colonization and genocide that has lived through generations. And so, for all people in the world, there is this construct of intergenerational trauma and racial trauma. Even though none of us alive have experienced enslavement, we are still living in a space where our bodies, our minds, and our souls understand that that experience existed. And some of the decisions that we make, some of the way that we move through the world, it shows. And so we have to be honest to talk about it, because it speaks to the magnitude of the problem. And it's only if we know the magnitude of the problem of how this lives in us can we adequately move through resources. And my last point before you move on is about the traumatic piece and recovering. Resilience is a huge thing, and we always focus on post-traumatic stress, but there's a counter to post-traumatic stress, and it's called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is when we understand and realize strengths that we have that were born from a traumatic experience that we never would have known. I was doing a trauma training in Johannesburg a couple of years ago, and a young lady stood up and she said she started her nonprofit because she became head of household at age of 11 when her parents were murdered, and she began her menstruation and had no idea what was going on. Her nonprofit is delivering sanitary supplies to girls in rural townships around Johannesburg so they don't have to have that same experience. Did we want that young girl to have to go through that trauma to realize her strength? No. However, when we do have trauma, it doesn't always have to result in PTSD. There are resiliency factors that can push us to post-traumatic growth.
I love that, Dr. Grant. And my father took his own life when I was 7 months old. And I went through, my best friend also took her own life in 2014. And in 2015, I came close to taking my own life, which is why I started Silence to Shame. And now we are one of the most commonly used hashtags in communities, especially communities of color, around mental health discussions. So you just blessed me, King. That is just such good information. And I heard that notion before, but I hadn't really learned a lot about post-traumatic growth. So thank you for that, because I feel like I am still growing through my trauma of, a lot of my own challenges. So hopefully that blessed someone and resonated with someone, but that was awesome. I'd like to go to Sean next. Mental illness in America is criminalized. In 44 states, jails and prisons house more mentally ill individuals than the largest remaining state psychiatric hospital. People with conditions such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia are 10 times more likely to be put behind bars than hospitalized, which is insane in itself. As a public defender, you are often the final barrier between individuals in need of mental health treatment and a prison cell. And Common, the rapper and activist, is a good friend of mine. And we talked throughout the pandemic, and we talked about how when he did his jail tour, so many of the young men that were incarcerated were in need of real mental health services, right, and treatment, and they weren't getting that sort of help within the system. Can you describe how you have seen the criminalization of mental illness in your professional experience?
Yes, actually, I see it pretty much every day that I'm in court. Since I started being a public defender, since I started representing clients, especially indigent clients, we see it literally every day. And the way I see it is basically it comes from pretty much everyone in the courtroom. I've worked with DAs that you approach, if a defense attorney approaches them and says, look, my client he's suffering from this mental health issue. Can we try to get him in a program instead of 2 years in jail? Oh, this client has mental health issues too. Or you came with me, you came to me with that 2 weeks ago for another client. It's like DAs look at it as a way for a defense attorney to use it as an excuse to get them out of punishment than actually a real issue that needs to be addressed. So that's where, that's not the first part. The first part is the way officers deal with people in the streets that have mental health issues. But let's get past that part. Let's say they survived the officer encounter and now we're in court. Now the DAs are looking at them like they're trying to use it as an excuse. But then I also see judges that do the same thing. I'll see judges that I've been in front of judges that literally have told people that are self-medicating. They know that this person has a history of issues they're dealing with. They know this person hasn't properly addressed these issues. They know this person hasn't got a doctor or a therapist or anything like that to help them. And I've seen judges actually say, well, since drugs are your problem, I know a place you can't get drugs, and that's in prison. And we all know it's easier to get drugs in prison than it is on the streets these days, but that's just the mindset of the judge. Again, it seems like they look at it as this is a way to get out of going to jail, or this is a way to get out of getting in trouble, when it just isn't. The jails, the prisons, the officers, they're not trained to handle mental health issues. They're not trained to even see mental health issues. What we would see as a mental health issue or a reaction because of a mental health problem, they see aggression, or they see someone not listening, or they see someone who's not taking my orders. And it's actually really sad. But then again, I see it with defense attorneys too. I mean, I see defense attorneys that don't take that extra step to talk to their client. They don't take that extra step to talk to the family. They don't take that extra step to even reach out to see if there was a mental health diagnosis in school, or a mental health diagnosis when they were in any type of facility. I mean, defense attorneys just don't do it. It's almost, sadly, there are a lot of courts in Georgia that are still like the conveyor belt. You put them on that conveyor belt, they move, they get sentenced, and then come back again. And I mean, same thing happens. They get put back on that conveyor belt.
It's a cycle, right?
It really is. I had this question reminds me of a client that I had, that he wasn't even my client. I had I believe he was like 45 years old. His mother reached out to me because a whole lot of mental health issues. He lives with his mother still, and continuously got arrested. I come to find out he would get arrested, go to jail for a couple of months, get out, and then like 3 or 4 weeks later, he'd get arrested again. And it was just a cycle for him. Come to find out, he had mental health issues, and the facility they had in their community was a facility that can only hold a person for 2 weeks. So after that 2 weeks, they move the person out because that bed has to become available for someone else. So now he's in for 2 weeks. There's no problems. He gets out. He's not in therapy anymore. He has no medication anymore. He's not seeing anybody. So he goes back to intoxication and public intoxication. Then he gets caught with drugs, gets put back in front of the judge. I mean, and this guy, looking at his record, when I finally took his case, he had been arrested like 30 or 40 times.
Oh my gosh.
It was always like around the same amount of time. He'd do a couple months in jail, get out, 2 weeks later, he gets arrested. And all it took was for one attorney to look into his history. All it took was for one attorney to go to the facility, make a phone call, and just sadly, a lot of attorneys don't do that. And we can't leave it up to the judges and DAs because they've proven they're not going to help us.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Thank you for that, Sean. So much work needs to be done, which is why I'm excited that Gideon's Promise has teamed up with Silence and Shame to not only do this important conversation today, but we're committed to doing some trainings and really just trying to educate other public defenders, other people within the legal system, as we do this critical work and to try to get the resources needed from a mental health perspective into the communities. I want to go back to you, Dr. Grant. Between 1980 and 1999, the suicide rate for Black male youth ages 15 to 19 increased by 146%. This timeline corresponds to Reagan's intensification of the war on drugs as Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act in 1986, which created racially motivated mandatory minimum sentences and fueled the disproportionate incarceration of Black men. These policies tore families apart and increased the likelihood that children will suffer from depression. What are some key first steps to transforming systems that cause this harm to keep families together and create healthy communities?
Another great question. And the first focus is to recognize that this is a problem, to recognize that there are deliberate systems in place that disenfranchise families disproportionately. Black and brown families are being torn apart by massive amounts of policies across our nation. One of the things that we're looking at right now is the difference in the way that we have approached the substance abuse problem. The way that we treated the crack epidemic in the 80s is much different than the empathic approach that we have to the opioid epidemic currently. And that is largely due to the demographic that is impacted by opioid abuse. And so when we look at and we juxtapose these two things, we say something is wrong here. The problem problem is that structural racism is so strong that even with all these data points, people are not willing to acknowledge that we are deliberately harming other groups. I think about the movie my mom used to watch when I was a kid, Claudine, and you saw the scene where he had to take all of his stuff out the house when the welfare worker was coming, because otherwise, if she had a toaster, if there was a man's shoe in the house. And so historically and intergenerationally, systems in America have worked deliberately to disenfranchise the Black family, which in turn disenfranchised the Black community. I'm not speaking at that from a deficits basis. I'm speaking what externally came in to create risk factors. Now we have to deliberately do things to patch them up. We have to have these types of conversations so that people can go back to their communities. We have to encourage people to vote, not just in your federal elections, because your local elections impact your daily life oftentimes more than your federal elections. When we look at these suicide rates, we have to begin making sure that we break this stigma on mental health. When we look at the environment and the ecology in which Black people develop, it's riddled with risk factors that create mental health concerns just in general. Research shows that. And so if we're not making sure we're taking care of our babies, and we're talking about suicide, and we're talking about this new research on cloaked suicides, meaning looking at single car accidents for communities where suicide is taboo. You got an 18-year-old Black man who just ran into a wall, no alcohol, no drugs, no other cars. Are we talking about what his history of mental health was when we see people engage in gang violence that they know is going to result in a certain way? This whole suicide by cop, I don't like the name of that, but I understand the construct. And so we have to begin having these conversations. Chris Rock said it years ago. The only mental health condition that has ever existed in the Black community was a nervous breakdown. And it's like, no, Aunt Sally had schizophrenia.
Yes.
Uncle Tom was bipolar. We have to name these things so that we can impact and stop these suicide rates. And another important statistic is that overall, Black people engage in suicidal behaviors at a lower rate. But like Shanti just mentioned, there are several segments whereby we are almost double or triple the rate. One of those spaces are Black kids ages 5 to 12. Their rates of suicide is twice as large as white kids in that same age range. It changes at 13, but what's happening with our babies that we're not paying attention to, that for that moment in time, that critical moment, those 7 years from 5 to 12, that suicide rate doubles. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they not seeing? What are they not hearing? And what do we need to do about it?
Absolutely. We have to name it. We have to call it. We have to take action. The good brother and poet Tupac, talked a lot about suicidal ideation. His birthday, he would have turned 50 this coming June. And I've been listening to a lot of his music and just seeing how much he really, talked about so much that was plaguing Black males in our community at large. And to hear him really talk about his suicidal thoughts, I thought was quite interesting in 1998, right? Decades ago. But we find those factors still plaguing our community, and especially our young Black males. And I'd like to go to you, Emmanuel, next. Your story is one of immense strength, of character and determination. And I honor you, King, and thank you for being a part of this conversation today and all that you've endured. And we just appreciate your input and your voice today. In your own words, could you describe what happened when you were incarcerated at 18 and how you persevered over 2 decades in prison?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. At the time that I was incarcerated at 18, I had like a mentality that you gave it to a young man, but a man. And I had to change some of the things that I've done in order to proceed forward. I had to self-train myself to read. I had to self-train myself to retool myself to make it through the whole situation. Because you have to understand, the warden had to actually sign off for 3 of us, 3 individuals, to come on the compound at USP. because of our age. They didn't think we were gonna make it.
Mm.
So that in itself is significant in itself. Good family, good friends. You learn who your friends are and who your family is.
Mm-hmm.
Do something. My story is like a movie, like a storybook. You can't write what happened to me into where I'm at right now. From losing family members to losing friends, and still come outside and push forward is a testimony in itself.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have been trying to get me to tell my story, but I've been reluctant to just push back and just keep it to myself and not talk to anybody about what I went through and this, that, and the third. But at the same token, I feel like it's an obligation to give back to the younger guys and some of the older guys that are getting released right now,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have somebody to do the things that were done for me. They don't have somebody to take their hand and lead them and say, hey, listen, no credit is good credit. And you can build yourself from no credit to great credit as opposed to having bad credit. So it's a lot of things that we as individuals that are out here can do to help the individual that's coming home and allow them to grow. Just sending them a letter, a card, or whatever. It's the small things that keep a person pushing. It's not the bigger things. Everybody think you have to send somebody money. Everybody think you have to go above and beyond to just say I love you, and you don't. So I'm getting a little touchy right now because the doctor touched on so many aspects of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Even the brother right here, Sean, he spoke on everything that I've seen, everything that I've been through, and in itself, he understands, the doctor understands, but no one has really pushed for a solution. So we all know what the problem is, but we have no solutions that would cover the whole basis for the younger kids. Because you can tell a younger kid, hey, you need to start doing this, that, and the third. But you don't know his family situation. You don't know his mom smoking crack. You don't know his sister hasn't eaten in 2-3 days. So how would you tell him or any individual to stop doing what they're doing? And you don't give them another means of achieving something to sustain them. We don't own a whole lot. And what we do own as individuals, as people, we try to hold on to it. And we try to share somewhat to a degree, but we don't own car companies, but we design all the cars for everybody, from General Motors to Ford to everybody.
Tell it.
But we don't own no Fortune 500 companies. So we can't reach out and find people without owning something. They even took the music game and they put it in their pocket. And we don't have a leg to stand on to help our people to say, okay, I got a job for you. Okay, I can feed your sister and them for a week or two, but I want you to come work for me to get stuff. So we have a lot of things to work on. It ain't just about being incarcerated. Being incarcerated was good to me. The only thing I regret about being incarcerated is I lost my mom. That's it. I wasn't enough for her in the end. That's it. So I made a promise to her to push through and try to do it the right way this time. So I'm trying to stand on that. Other than that, as far as my ordeal dealing with the system, it's no
Wait,
different
hold
than
on. I gotta, brother. Can I just say, you're one of the strongest Black men I've talked to in recent years, and it's just such an honor to hear your story. And I thank you because I know you haven't opened up to a lot of people. And Gideon's Promise thanks you just for being here today and holding space with us. I think it's really important that we celebrate each other on big wins and small wins. And this is a big deal with you opening up and sharing and being so transparent with us. So I just want to again honor you and just say thank you, not to cut you off, but I felt the spirit moved me to just say that to you because again, coming from a place of love in our community, and you talked about how we don't know what the family members going through, you know, going back to Tupac talked about the hate that you give. Society throws so much at us. We're not equipped to even handle these situations when we do get incarcerated or other things happen in our communities, and being able to tell somebody that you love them, or going back to the old school text message, which was sending a card. You know, people that are incarcerated love getting letters, and we got to do better as a community, and we got to take care of each other. And so again, I just want to thank you for just what you just said and just honor this sacred space and place that we're in today.
Mm-hmm. But like I still have friends, childhood friends that are incarcerated, and I know his mother holding on for him, but he trying, you know. And sometimes we miss out on just being there. Sometimes we don't understand the influence that we have on our younger cousins, nieces, and nephews until it's too late. And then you trying to iterate something into them, but they already saying negativity and whatever you don't want. So it's just a lot. But the only thing, like I said, the only thing kept me going, my friends, my family, and my mother. And even after she passed, she kept me going because I had to make a promise to her. So,
Thank you, Emmanuel. And if you feel comfortable, what do you think was the most emotionally difficult aspect of your time in prison? And then I'd love for Dr. Grant and Sean to respond to that, to your response.
being able to have the funds to go to a funeral, having the necessities, the ends to attend the funeral, and be denied access to go to the funeral. Then your mom put the rest on a video in the chapel. That might be the most detrimental part of the whole situation. And then losing my sister 30 days after that, my ace.
Mm.
So yeah, that was probably the hardest part.
I'm very sorry for your loss. I lost my sister 2 years ago. I definitely can't say I know your pain, but I understand the loss of losing your ace. I felt like I lost a part of me. So I'm very sorry for your loss. Dr. Grant, can you respond a little bit to what Emmanuel just shared, and how those situational experiences, you know, can lead to trauma and anxiety and even more for particularly our Black men and women that are dealing with similar situations?
Yeah, like you, Shanti, I want to honor you, King Emmanuel, for sharing that. And in addition to being brave enough to share it, what you just did was you demonstrated a model that thousands of men will see, because men are very early on handicapped from a very important component of self-care, and that's crying. Men are told very early on, you'll see a kid on the playground, his knee will be busted open to the white meat, and dad's sitting there, stop crying. And early on, we're handicapped from that. So people need to know there are only two ways in which we can physiologically release stress from our bodies. That's through tears and through perspiration. There are measurable amounts of cortisol, the stress hormone, in both of those fluids. Early on, men and boys and Black girls and brown girls are told not to cry. And so I want to honor you for sharing your story, but also allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough so that other people can recognize and have a model of your healing to say, wow, this brother who's been through this is okay to sit here and move through that space and be tearful about his experience. Maybe I still got to go to the bathroom to do it, or maybe I still got to go in the closet, but I'm going to cry too. Everybody on this call can recognize when they had a good cry. That's because you literally have released the hormone out of your body that makes you experience stress. That's why physical exercise helps with stress, because you're literally releasing out your body. So wanted to say that really quickly. And the fact that these things live with us. And, you know, for Emmanuel, I'm imagining, I don't know this to be true, that some of this is cathartic. Holding it and feeling shame is one of the things that kind of breaks people. And, you know, your willingness to share can be cathartic for you. Do you feel released when you kind of share a little bit of this, Emmanuel?
Oh yeah, I release it all the time because I'm a spiritual type guy. I believe in my mother's state had me in church all the time, so I listen to gospel music all the time. But she is my rock, and I had my father in the house. But see, I'm mama's boy. I'm my mom's only son. And I came first.
Yeah. We need those tangible things to hold on to and connect to. And when you ask them about what was the most traumatic experience, I think one of the most memorable experiences, I think we also sometimes forget for our incarcerated brothers and sisters that missing out on the external events to the world can be as traumatic as some of the dangers that exist inside our systems of incarceration. Missing things with your kids, your family members, funerals. And for people of color, a funeral is a big part of our mourning process. The whole repast, which many of us have missed out on as a result of the pandemic, is a part of healing. I recently was back east for a funeral of a really close loved one. And, you know, it wouldn't have been the same had it been a year ago, because I wouldn't have been able to have those moments with my cousins and my family that refilled my soul a little bit in my mourning process. When you're incarcerated, that ritual is taken from you. And sometimes it's taken from you due to a system of racism, because there may not have been a real reason why this brother couldn't have attended his mother's funeral. There may not be a real reason why that woman who is pregnant has to deliver in that facility. All these practices and policies are aimed at the deliberate, hear me when I say deliberate business continuity model of maintaining Black people and brown people in oppressive systems. Michelle Alexander wasn't joking when she said the new Jim Crow. It's here. See it. Believe it.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Quickly, Sean, do you have anything just to add to that before we go to our next question?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. What Emmanuel said, I get that from my clients a lot. It's not always about putting money on the books. It's not always about, the simple hi, the simple message, the simple card. Like I have, now I'm with the Capitol Defender's Office. So all of my clients are sitting in a cell by themselves, and they have to deal with the fact that the state of Georgia is trying to kill them. That's what they deal with. And I just turned 39. None of them are remotely close to my age. They're literally kids compared to me. And I have them call me just when they just want to get out of the cell and talk to somebody. Like the smallest, hello, how are you doing? I saw your son today. He was wearing the shoes you wanted to. That small, short conversation does so much more than people think. It's not just about the money. It's just about still feeling like you're a human being. When you're in prison, even if it's jail, but when you're in prison, they do everything they possibly can to strip you of of being a human being. And that one 5 minutes out of your cell a day talking to somebody, or that 3 minutes that you got a letter and you got to the excitement of opening it. My clients have told me that changes everything for them. It changes the mindset of what they're dealing with. So that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I'm sure it helps to cut down on the trauma they're experiencing, right? At their time during the incarceration. I want to go back to you quickly, Dr. Grant. One study, and we're talking about this a little bit in terms of being able to release and personal signs of weakness or strength. One study has found that 60% of Black people see mental health conditions as signs of personal weakness, and dealing with them, whether you're crying or how you're emotionally getting through them and processing it. Can you describe how racism and patriarchy intersect to create impossible expectations for strength of Black men?
Another great question. I want to talk to whoever wrote these questions. Did you write these questions, Shanti?
I cannot take credit for them. That would be Aaron and the Gideon's Promise team.
All
Shout
right,
out
Gideon.
to them. Yes.
All right, Gideon's Promise. All right.
in the house.
Let's do it. Let's do it. This is a critical question, and I see this not just with Black men, but with Black women as well. So I'm going to answer it on both sides because I look at what I've been recently calling the Stacey Abrams effect. And Stacey Abrams saved our democracy, right? We rely upon this so heavily because what we do is we minimize the pain that Black and brown people actually literally experience by othering them into these superheroes. And so when we do that, we make it such that right now, statistically, Black women and Black babies are dying on the birthing tables like no other in the world. Yeah. That's because doctors look at these Black women on the table and presume that the pain that they're demonstrating is not rising to the level of, we need to check on this woman, we need to check on this baby. When we look at how Black men are treated in the streets, out in the workplace, anywhere else in the world, they're seen to have this Herculean effort that exists. Now, let me say this very clearly. That is all a relic of white supremacy and patriarchy, as you just mentioned. There's this concept, and I'll be really brief, there's this concept of cognitive dissonance that says that you can't have two competing thoughts in your brain at the same time. It's not possible, right? And so the slave owner who would take his kids to church, love his wife, all these different things, and then come home and cut somebody's foot off for trying to run away from the plantation, he can't consider himself a God-fearing, loving human being at the same time that he's doing this to another human being. As a result, you convince yourself in the world that these people are subhuman or superhuman, one or the other. And as a result, we still have this premise in our world today where we believe that Black people can shoulder a disproportionate amount of the world's evils without breaking. And what it causes is the mistreatment of Black people, the dangers of Black bodies. There's a great book called Medical Apartheid, written by Harriet Washington. It's amazing.
We should put it in the chat.
Yeah, please put that in the chat. Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington talks about the intergenerational dismantling of Black bodies in the medical community. And I sit as a volunteer faculty at the University of Buffalo Medical School, where each year I open a lecture for starting medical students on the dangers of intergenerational and structural racism in the medical community. This goes through everything. This misnomer about our strength is an excuse to hurt us.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Wow, we are 40 minutes in. This is incredible to reset the room. Again, you're tuned into a community conversation, a discussion on racial trauma and criminal justice presented by Gideon's Promise and Silence to Shame. I am your moderator, Shanti Das. We have 3 dynamic panelists here today. I want to go back to you, Emmanuel. Can you tell me what your experience was with your federally appointed attorney, and how do you wish they supported you?
My federal appointed attorney was basically standoffish. And what I mean by that is I'm 18. And my mother basically had more conversations with him than I did. So by that being the case, and by me speaking to some other individuals, I noticed that he wasn't working for me. He was just going through the motions and doing everything that he had to do. as far as procedure wise that he was supposed to do. Anything else outside of that, it didn't come out until I went to trial that he really didn't do anything that he was supposed to. He didn't interview witnesses. He didn't know what the people at the facility was going to say. They didn't know that the people were going to say that the tallest person was 6 foot and they were short and thin. I've never been 6 foot, and I was probably 10 because I came out 13 pounds, 8 ounces. And I'm 6'3" and a half, almost 6'4".
Wow.
And I've never been 10. But that goes back to they had a sidebar. And by them having a sidebar, they came back with a plea. And I told them, I said, well, why would I take a plea? And the individuals that I have just basically exonerated me that work at the facility.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecutor got upset. And I said, well, no, I'm going to try. I'm going to finish. I'm going to finish it. And the worst thing that any individual can tell you about the federal part and the procedures is if you go to trial and you lose, they're going to give you the whole shebang.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care if you had some little odds and ends. You may not seem to be the individuals that people say you were, but they're going to give it to you all. And that's because you made them spend a little bit of more money than they normally like to spend. All of it comes down to revenue at the end of the day. And if you ask Sean will tell you they tell him to bring a checkbook with him when he goes to court. You know what I'm talking about. And I don't want to expose that. I'll let Sean tell you that if he wants to tell you that.
I was going to kick it to Sean afterwards to see what his thoughts were on that.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if things don't go the way it's supposed to go, somebody got to write a check. So it's all about money. It's a revenue.
It is, but that just leads to the stress and anxiety, right? On top of everything that you're dealing with. Sean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, sadly, what he said, that's what so many people in the criminal justice system, that's what they deal with. That's what they believe. I mean, it's the reason when you hear public defender, you don't feel comfortable with it. It's not like a great feeling. Like when the words private attorney means so much more when you're in this system, not because of skill, not because of the school, not because of education, not because of experience, simply because you paid somebody to stand next to you. You feel better about it in this system. And I mean, that's why Gideon's Promise was created. But sadly, that goes on everywhere. I mean, he's right. If you go to trial, and it's not just the federal system. In the federal system, it's worse. But in the circuits that I work in, if you go to trial and lose, you're getting pretty much as much time as the judge can hand down to you. It happens all the time, and it starts with defense attorneys. It starts with public defenders. We're the ones that are supposed to be working for you. And like he said, I know clients that I've represented later on that couldn't tell you what their public defender looked like. And that's just disturbing that they're sitting in prison, or sitting in jail for multiple years and have no idea what this person looks like. Unfortunately, it happens all the time in this system.
Yeah, we got work to do. We got to fix this system. Absolutely. I'm going to stay with you for a bit, Sean. Gideon's Promise public defenders handle an average of 250 cases annually, which exceeds the American Bar Association's recommended caseload of 100 cases. Given this intense workload, it is unsurprising that public defense offices experience high turnover rates and professional burnout. As a public defender, how do you prioritize and care for your own mental health and wellness?
Granted, COVID kind of changed everything for us when it comes to our mental health, but the biggest thing that I've seen throughout the years that helps me is I need to figure out what works for me. I have a lot of attorneys that love to do yoga. I have a lot of attorneys that will run miles. I have attorneys that will turn their business phone off at 7 o'clock on Friday and won't turn it back on or won't look at an email until Monday morning at 9 o'clock. That doesn't work for me. I had to figure out how I could physically be okay and mentally be okay, but it had to be a process that I could commit to, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like now I work out 4 to 5 times a week. I have a motorcycle that I get on all the time. I have a dog that I will walk for 45 minutes to an hour, but I don't meditate in my bed an hour before I wake up in the morning. That just doesn't work for me. Or I don't go run 6 miles because it's just something I can't do. The biggest thing that has helped me through all of this is basically setting goals, not goals. I basically say setting parameters that you,
or even SMART goals. You can say goals because there's a such thing as SMART goals. Like those can be smaller, attainable goals, right?
Like the biggest thing for me now, like I said, because my clients are facing the death penalty, I can't turn off a phone at 7 o'clock and not touch it again. It's just my mind will not let me do that because their families will reach out. The judges will reach out. They can still call me on Sunday. I mean, I need that. So once I figured out what worked for me, once I figured out how I could be physically okay and mentally okay and still represent my client, I mean, it is still a process. It's not perfect. I don't sleep as much as I should probably, but I mean, does any of us right now? I mean, everything's crazy at the moment, but it's just finding a routine that you can commit to and going from there and not doing what you see everybody else do, because I just can't do that.
100%. I tell people all the time, figure out what works for you, incorporate that self-care regimen on a daily basis. It's not just about hashtag self-care Saturday or self-care Sunday. You really got to do it throughout the week. And we use our Google calendars and reminders and alarms for everything else. Well, set some meetings for yourself. Just like, you had this Zoom or you got that 8 o'clock meeting, or you might be slowly going back into the office now or traveling for work. Build into your daily schedule time for you to either walk or meditate or exercise. Like Sean said, find what works for you. Because I'm not a runner either, but I like to take walks, and I'm not into meditation, but I like to pray and I like to watch spiritual videos and that sort of thing. But you got to figure out what works for you. This is such a great conversation. I wish we had more time. We probably have around 12 minutes left. So we're going to try to shoot through these questions pretty quickly. I want to go back to you, Emmanuel. You have said that even though your probation officers claim to want to see you succeed, the barriers you faced during your reentry made you feel trapped in a system designed for you to fail. Can you describe the challenges you faced during your time on probation, and how were you able to prioritize your mental health and well-being during that time?
Well, the things I faced during probation is I never asked for any help. I've always networked through my network of people. And being able to network through my people, the initial probation officer didn't have a problem with it. The second probation officer had a problem with it because I didn't use their network. So in turn, they did little things like call my employer, tell my employee, you're on supervised release. But the number one thing they tell you coming out of federal prison is don't tell them you're on supervised release. Because, as you know, it's 2 decades. I'm not even listening. So then in turn, and then when I tried to go visit my grandmother's gravesite, which she lives in Castleberry, Alabama. She died 4 months before I was released. I was denied access to go there because you can only go out of 500 mile radius in northern Georgia, and anything else outside of that, you have to ask for permission. So I was not granted that permission. Then when I was trying to transition and leave and get married and get engaged, I had issues. But I will say this, I had to go to the supervisor. And the supervisor said, I see you've been on probation for 4 years. You haven't had a write-up. You haven't been in any kind of trouble. Why haven't we put you in to get released and you requested it twice? I said, I don't know. I have no clue how I did it. She said, you know what? I'm going to put you in. She put me in that Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget it. Monday was Columbus Day. That Tuesday I was off. I've never seen anything like that. And I'm saying that because the creator be working in your favor sometimes, and you don't even know he be working for you. You know what you be going through, but you don't know what he got planned for you. So I'm gonna tell everybody on this panel, God got something especially created for your life. You never know what it is, but you have to always know that he has your best interest at heart. And that's what got me through the probation part. Because every time a roadblock was put in my path, it dissipated. I transitioned through 2-3 jobs, got the job that I needed and I wanted, and worked the job. Bought me a house, bought me a truck, transitioned, and now I'm engaged to get married. So all those things happen to the point to where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't do that. So I can see that everybody that looks like you ain't for you. And everybody that smiles at you ain't for you. But you got to love yourself through it all. If you stop loving yourself, you ain't gonna make it in this world. You
That's
got
right.
to have something. You got to build yourself up. And then once you build yourself up, then you build somebody else up. I didn't think it would be on this platform for me to speak like this and help build somebody else up. But my nephews, my cousins, other little homies in the neighborhood, I always put them to the side and say, hey, man, you can do it this way and you can go that way. Or you can do it this way and go this way. But it's your choice. Everybody has their choice. God gave everybody a choice. It's which one you want to choose. And I chose to push forward because I made a promise to my mom. And that's all I have to say about the probation part.
Thank you, Emmanuel. It's a beautiful story, and congratulations on everything you've accomplished thus far, and on your engagement. We're sending you virtual hugs and balloons and celebratory greetings and salutations. That's beautiful, Dr. Grant. Can you elaborate a little bit? Again, we're about 7 minutes out. Hopefully, maybe we can go over for 5 minutes. But obviously, Emmanuel used spirituality and prayer as a means of coping through his emotional challenges. And sometimes, some people, men and women, they don't have the wherewithal if they are experiencing more serious mental health issues around the trauma that they've experienced through incarceration or reentry programs. Just talk a little bit more about healthy ways to cope. Oftentimes in the Black community, we receive a lower quality of mental health care, right? And then the lack of culturally competent care and clinicians that look like me and you, that look like yourself. So can you talk a little bit more about the brothers and sisters that may not have the wherewithal to be able to utilize spirituality as a coping mechanism and that may need medication and therapy and even more?
Yeah, there's a lot of routes to wellness, and I appreciate Emmanuel sharing how he uses those tools, and Sean dropped a lot of great knowledge a little while ago about the tools that he uses for his self-care and his wellness. I happen to be a yoga dude, Sean, and so I get it's not for everybody. And with the pandemic, I've been having to do hot yoga in my yard, and it ain't hot, but it's still yoga. And so we have to think about the structures again as a part of this larger system of patriarchy. It's funny how white America has co-opted yoga to where Black people are like, oh, that ain't for me, when in reality, it wasn't even theirs. And so when we think about these things, I had Black kids in foster care when I was working foster care systems in LA County doing yoga. And people said, oh, you got little Black and brown kids doing yoga? I said, I do, because it's a tool. It's breathing, it's meditation. I used to write for Ebony magazine. I wrote an article called Black Suicide When Prayer Isn't Enough years ago, as it relates to this exact topic, to help us understand that religion is a wonderful, and religion and spirituality are wonderful support tools, wonderful protective factors. However, because we tend to minimize the impact of mental wellness and mental health, we sometimes minimize the biological component. I'm not saying everybody needs medication, but you don't go to your preacher to get your insulin. So we can utilize our ministers. I hope my grandmama ain't on this Zoom. We can utilize our ministers as our prayer partners, as all these resources, but we also have to know when a more formal measure is needed. You can't pray away schizophrenia, but you can pray for a great psychiatrist to support you and your family as you move through schizophrenia.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Grant. So we're coming up to our hour. This has been an incredibly powerful conversation through Emmanuel, your journey, which is now your testimony. So thank you, brother, for sharing your testimony. And I know the angels and the ancestors that transcends it into the heavens that are looking down and guiding over you are so proud of you right now. So again, on behalf of Gideon's Promise and Silence of Shame, thank you for sharing your testimony today. And Sean, for oh my gosh, just the work that you do is incredible. All the cases that you have, and we know that you work through the weekend, and we're just so proud of you. The chat is open. If anyone has one or two questions for these brothers, I know our time is almost coming to an end, but we want to give anyone a chance to put a question in the chat.
Shanti,
and then also,
can I say really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I just don't want to lose that thing that Sean told us about his availability to his to the people he works with. When I heard it, it rang so real with me when I heard him say he's able to tell somebody in prison, I saw your son today. It just stuck with me so heavily. And I wanted us to honor, it was such a big deal. Like, wow, I can be your eyes out here, and I'm going to be available to talk to you so that you can see what I see. That's huge. That's huge, brother. And I honor that in you. That's amazing.
And that does a lot for the emotional health and wellness of the family, right? Because we can have part two of this discussion on how the racial trauma and criminal justice issues, if you will, that families have to deal with when their loved ones are incarcerated, the type of emotional toll it takes on them as caregivers and as family members. I think that's another, hopefully, podcast or community conversation for another day. But I wanted each of you to go around and just share any final words. We'll start with you, Sean. Any advice you can give around mental health and wellness to young Black men, whether they are incarcerated or just, young and Black in America right now? What would you say to that audience, Sean?
I would say we have to stop looking at it as like an anchor. We have to stop looking at it as something that holds us down to where we can't be something, we can't move past it. It's not. We know that there are doctors out there. We know that, and I hate to say there's medication, but there are avenues that we don't even know about because we don't even talk about it. We look at it as something negative and we just shut it off at that point. And we have to stop doing that. Mm-hmm. Every time I talk to high school kids, every time I talk to college kids, I tell them, like, how many more of us could be doctors and lawyers and politicians if we would have addressed something, if our family would have addressed something when we were in elementary school and just not dump Ritalin on us. Mm-hmm. We have to stop looking at this as an anchor or as a bad thing. I mean, look at it as your superpower. It's something you have to not only be able to work with, but use it to get you to that next level. So that's the biggest thing for me.
Thank you. Emmanuel?
Yes.
What would you say to young Black men, whether they're incarcerated or just growing up young and Black in America right now?
Retool yourself. When you retool yourself, everything that he just expressed can be attained. But you have to retool yourself. And if it's through education, if it's through spirituality, if it's through going to see a psychiatrist, retool yourself. Because once you retool yourself, you recreate yourself. But you have to retool. And that's what I would tell anyone. Not just men, but women as well.
100%. Thank you so much. I'm retooling myself right now, Emmanuel. I'm back in therapy. I'm still dealing with this loss of my sister, brother. So this grief journey has been tough. So I'm trying to retool as I try to help heal the world. I got to heal myself as well. Dr. Grant, any final words on our young Black kings out here in America right now?
Absolutely. And the way you frame that is my perfect closing statement, in that we got to go back to recognizing our royalty. White America consistently gets messages of their historical royalty and their contributions to this land. Black Americans are oftentimes grounded in the fact that our origins were in our bondage. I need every Black person to be able to connect to our ancestry of royalty for that moment when you walk out of that meeting and somebody threw you shade because you decided to wear your natural hair to work, or you decided to talk about something that was cultural to you, and you leave with that injury. How do you reconnect with the history that other people get naturally embedded into them? We minimize the importance of being able to connect ourselves to Queen Nefertiti, King Mansa Musa, all these different people who are our historical figures. Although Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and all these individuals are wonderful, their stories are grounded in our oppression. We need other heroes too.
I love that. I love that. Oh gosh, so much knowledge and information, and we're getting some really incredible comments coming through right now on the chat. I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but Yvette said, "Great presentation. Thank you." Illy said, "Sean, keep up the great work, and thank you everyone for fulfilling Gideon's promise." Maya said, "This conversation was incredible, informative, and one of the best she's been to in a while. Thank you so much." So the great comments and accolades keep coming in. I want to also just leave everyone with some resources. I think that is super important. Of course, you can visit our website, silencetheshame.com. There is a resource tab on there, and we are linked to several other incredible mental health advocacy organizations and substance abuse awareness organizations in the United States. But the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK. Also, you can visit NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, at NAMI.org. Actually, they have a Black CEO now. Shout out to the brother Dan, who's doing a lot of great things over there. If you're in need of a therapist and don't know where to go, a lot of people are like, I don't even know where to go, how to find a therapist. What do I do? So you can go to therapyforblackgirls.com. Dr. Joy is phenomenal and has built an incredible platform with over 500,000 followers on Instagram. So a lot of great information there daily around meditation and wellness and therapy. And for our brothers, you can go to www.therapyforblackmen.org. And that's just scratching the surface. But I am just excited about this one idea. I can't remember which viewer said it, but they talked about a letter writing campaign. I'd like to challenge Gideon's promise. Let's partner with each other on that. Silence the shame, because journaling and wellness, go hand in hand, and writing letters. And I think it could go towards, the mental health and wellness of our brothers and sisters that are incarcerated. So I definitely will commit to that, and whatever we need to do to help manifest that. I think it's incredible. So, thank you, Aaron from Gideon's Promise team. Thank you, Ebony. Thank you, Illy and Rap, for the work that you do, and all of the public defenders that are tuned in today that have been trained through Gideon's Promise. And thank you to the Silence the Shame team, Jewel and Free and Cameron. and everybody on our team. Hillary, we just appreciate you and value you and honor you, and Tamir, to be able to do this work and hold this space. This conversation is being recorded. It will be available on both of our YouTube pages as well as our socials. So if you like it or you liked it, tell everybody the link is coming, and please make sure that you take this critical information back into your communities. Again, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, but July is BIPOC Awareness Month, and September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. October is World Mental Health Day, October 10th. So this conversation does not stop here, right? It's a lot of people whose lives are on the line, or they're going back into the reentry programs, and we want to be able to make sure that we're pouring into them and their emotional health and wellness, because it really is mind, body, and soul. So we need these public defenders. We need to train them up. We need them to be mentally well so that they can go out and do this critical work in the community. So thank you all for tuning in today. I send you peace and blessings, and I ask you to take time, save a life, and silence the shame.